Okay. He is. I talked to him about his campaign, and he and his boss called me up to give him some advice on that.
I'll wave from the back, but we are live.
All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the first Biome seminar this semester as we come back from spring break. Biomes is YSE's flagship forum for bringing cutting-edge research and impactful work to the community. And in case you're wondering what the acronym is, it stands for Bridging Issues and Optimizing Methods in Environmental Studies. I am excited to introduce Margie Alt as this week's speaker. Margie is the director of the Climate Action Campaign, a vibrant coalition of 12 national environmental justice, and public health groups. Together with nearly 60 partners across the country, CAC brings a coordinated community, savvy strategy, powerful field operation, and professional communications team to the fight for equitable federal climate action. For more than 30 years, Margie has been a campaigner, organization builder, and leader. She served as the founding executive director of Environment America, ran campaigns to elect pro-environment candidates, led numerous state-level efforts to win policies with the Public Interest Network, and trained hundreds of staff and volunteers to better understand how to plan and win advocacy campaigns. She also teaches developing environmental policies and winning campaigns here at YSE. Please help me welcome Margie to the stage.
Thank you, Isabella. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. I really took a shower this morning, so I do not know why you're sitting so far away from me. It's making me slightly uncomfortable, but I'll soldier on. This is nothing compared to what we're really dealing with. Nice, nice to see all of you. Let me tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'll tell you it, and there'll be plenty of time for conversation all along the way, and certainly at the end, because I think the most interesting thing I have to tell you is really to give you some ideas to hear what you're thinking about what I'm thinking about, which is what on earth we do now to save the climate in these very, very trying times. So let me tell you a minute about me, then we will talk a whole bunch about just the evidence that the climate crisis is here and what it's meaning for people here in the US and across the world. That's going to be a total downer, so finish your lunch before we get to that. It'll make you slightly nauseous. But then there'll be some bright spots because, in every crisis, there are some bright spots. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. But to me, the most important thing here is what do we do? Like, what do you do? What do we do? How do we organize ourselves and each other to make sure we still do all that's needed to reduce emissions, to create a more equitable country and planet, to make sure people have the resources and the opportunities for getting outdoors and living the quality of life that we all want and need and deserve. So that'll be, I hope, the highlight of this conversation. To tell you 2 more minutes about me, in addition to what Isabella said, I went to Yale as an undergrad. I have literally been organizing since I left. Well, I left in May. I started my first job July 1st of that year, and I have been organizing and advocating and campaigning ever since, always in the nonprofit, probably about 80% of that time on environmental issues, everything from the bottle bill in Massachusetts to helping to pass the first toxic use reduction law in the country in Massachusetts, to doing a lot of federal work, both on public lands and on clean energy, and now for the last 8 years or so exclusively around climate and clean energy and environmental justice, and almost all at the federal level. I would say, what's changed over that, those decades? Well, I left Yale as a very angry young woman, and now I am a very, very angry old woman, and pretty much nothing has changed other than the circumstances around us for me. So I know you know what you need to about the climate crisis. I know we all see this in the news all the time. I just picked out a couple of things to focus on just to help, make sure we're all on the same page about what really is going wrong out there and how it is affecting people. And, the LA wildfires earlier this year could not be a more stark reminder about how bad the problem is. And whether you're rich or poor, whether you're in a blue state or a red state, whether you have done a lot to try and save off the climate crisis or absolutely nothing, climate is still coming for you. It's coming for all of us all across the planet right now, and there's nothing we can do to stop where we are. The question is, how do we stave off the worst and make sure we can make the country and the world as sustainable as possible going forward? So, the death toll was real. 29 people died, 18,000 homes and buildings destroyed, somewhere between 28 and $53 billion in costs, not fully understood yet, and about 150,000 people displaced, many of whom are still displaced, not able to go back to their homes. Some will. Many people will never be able to go back to their homes. Not only is this, a climate crisis and a personal crisis, but it's also helping to spur the insurance crisis in California, just making it less and less easy to live in a climate-stricken world. And these are costs we just don't need to be paying. This extreme fire situation happened, obviously, because there was a fire, but the conditions were really, really dry. The weather had been very, very hot. And that risk that we created makes wildfires 35% more likely and over 50% more likely to be dangerous, very fast spreading and very hard to control. So we didn't do everything here, but we created conditions that made this fire so devastating. And that's just one example. On the other side of the country, you probably read about Hurricane Helene, which hit North Carolina, a little bit Georgia, but mostly North Carolina, really hard in September of 2024. 250 people died in that extreme weather crisis. There were over 7 million people without power, some of them for days, others for months before power was restored. Current figure is $88 billion in costs. And again, this is just the beginning of what's happening. One of the real ironies of what happened is Asheville, North Carolina was destroyed. Probably some of you know Asheville, gorgeous little hill town that considered itself to be a climate haven. People literally moved there because they thought they would not experience climate impacts, and then poor Asheville, unable to handle what was happening to it. Not only was it hurricane winds, but a lot of flooding. Trees went down. People literally couldn't leave their homes for days because the streets were blocked. And, statistics are one thing. It happens to be my niece lives in Asheville. So I wasn't getting the day by day because she didn't have cell phone service all the time, but I was definitely getting the couple of days by couple of days. And I do work on climate. I have no idea what she should do when there's no power and there's a log in front of her house and there's flooding and she didn't know how to feed her dog. So I Googled it while she was calling to complain and found her some centers that had dog food and people who were volunteering to help with pets. But that is the least of the problems that Hurricane Helene caused, and still Asheville is nowhere near rebuilt. So those are just two examples of many. In 2024 here in the US, there were 23 extreme weather events, each of which cost over $1 billion in damage. That is slightly fewer than there were the year before. There were, I think, 25, but each one in 2024 on average was worse, so the costs are going up. And this is just the United States. As we well know, extreme weather is hitting all across the world, and some countries and some people are even less well able to deal with it than we are here. And certainly many of them are way less responsible for creating the climate crisis than we are here. So downpours, droughts, wildfires from Kathmandu to Dubai to South America in the last 12 months, devastating floods have been one of the worst of the extreme weather events that are happening around the world. Floods in Sudan and Brazil were particularly bad in 2024. And the Amazon rainforest is also hard hit by climate change, less on the flooding side, more drought and huge loss of biodiversity. And we know what that means for ecosystems all across the world. Total damage, weather disasters 2024, over $402 billion. That is 20% higher than the 10-year average. And all of these problems are just getting worse. I have a few more really horrible things to tell you, and then we can move on to some more pleasant stuff. So stick with me. You might be familiar with the climate stripes. How many people have seen them before? Seen the climate stripes before? This is the average average temperature around the world every year going back over 100 years. You'll notice something about the more recent years. 2024 was just declared the hottest year in the world, as well as the hottest year in the US. It beat only one year as hottest, 2023. The 10 last years have been the 10 hottest years. And all of this is creating incredible pain for people. In fact, in this country, in the US, more people die from extreme heat than any other extreme weather event. And for those of you who are from the West, Phoenix is one of the hardest hit areas this past summer, over 100 days, over 100 degrees. They had cooling centers open, but even the cooling centers weren't enough. There weren't enough of them, and they couldn't stay open long enough to help everybody in the population who really needed relief from that extreme heat. The other thing that happened in 2024 is for the first time we breached an increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. For those of you who paid attention to the COPs, you might remember in the Paris Agreement, the world agreed to hold temperatures down below that 1.5 level. And that's because that's the level of increased heat that creates devastating impacts starting around the world. And we know that the people who tend to be hurt most are the people in some of the low-lying island nations around the world who have also created the least carbon pollution. And so a huge discrepancy and injustice in terms of how people are experiencing these kinds of problems. Around the world, this extreme heat that you see in this heat map of the stripes, on average, there are 41 additional days that are too hot for most people to survive. So that's over a month where the heat's unbearable in huge swaths of the world. And you just start to think of what that would be like to live with. And you know the whole world is suffering. And a lot of this really is unnecessary. And if we got it together, we could stave off summers like this, winters like this, and extreme weather like this all across the country. Moving from the actual impacts to a little bit about the whys, people are suffering hundreds of billions of dollars in damage, and yet fossil fuel companies are still raking in huge profits. These numbers that I'm showing you are just from the last quarter of 2024, not even from the whole year. These are just 3 companies. I assume you're sitting here so you already know that fossil fuels are the reason we have, burning fossil fuels are the reason we have the climate crisis. And so every day that fossil fuel companies are making more money is probably a day that they're not only mining or drilling or somehow gathering more fossil fuels and selling them to somebody else to burn. So every day they make money is probably a day the climate crisis is going to get worse, and they are making, where I come from, we would call it a shit ton of money. I don't know what the technical term for what that would be, but a lot. And then, my friends, we go to, you know, the new administration. Politics around here are not so hot. And politics around the world aren't doing that well either, with a couple of bright spots. So not to tell you all my problems, but we in this country somehow chose to elect people who are not only climate deniers, but actually think that getting more fossil fuels onto the grid is a good idea. And so just to give you a feel, I assume you recognize these people. Congress is also led right now by climate deniers, and the committees that are supposed to regulate climate are led by climate deniers. So the idea of federal progress is a little bit, you have to have a lot of creativity to see a path forward when it comes to federal climate progress. Just to give you a couple of examples, on day one, the day of the inauguration, January 20th, 2025, Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, as I'm sure you know. He nullified two big executive orders that Biden had put in place, one around environmental justice and pushing to make sure that as we rebuild America and brought more jobs and more investments to America, there was a proportionate share of those that went to traditional environmental justice communities, communities that tend to have been hit hardest and worst by the climate crisis and other problems. That was one of the executive orders he reversed, and the other one was the Climate and Clean Energy executive order that required all branches of government federally to work together to solve the climate crisis, made solving the climate crisis an overall goal of the federal government. That was then. We also, on day one, got serenaded with Drill Baby Drill a couple of times. So if there's anything that, you know, kind of makes your skin crawl, if you're an environmentalist, it's hearing that ringing in your ears. And then just 3 short months later, they have proceeded to devastate the federal government, as you know. And this affects us in all sorts of ways. It affects Yale and other institutions of higher education. It affects students who have loans and grants and other things. It affects poor people. It affects rich people. It's affecting businesses all across the country. So there's nobody who isn't hurt by these rollbacks right now. But if you look at our space, the climate and clean energy space, there have been thousands of layoffs. About 1,500 of them have been at EPA. Now, on the other hand, there have also been 400 people hired back, and then a couple of them got laid off again, but a couple more got hired back. So I can't really tell you right now. I know there's a lot that have been laid off, but people every day look to see if, you know, they got a pink slip or not, or they're called back because they turn out to be, you know, an urgent worker to do something or other around the government. They shut down all of EPA's environmental justice offices, so there are no longer any staff who are trying to make sure that the communities that are worst hit have protections. Just a couple of weeks ago, Lee Zeldin, who's the new EPA administrator, proudly announced it was the biggest day of deregulation in American history, and listed 31 standards and programs that he was going to roll back. And that's everything from standards for clean air and clean water, for making vehicles and power cleaner, and something called the endangerment finding, which is the policy that has guaranteed that the US can regulate carbon and other climate-causing pollution under the Clean Air Act. And it is both, you know, that's been affirmed by the Supreme Court, it's been affirmed by lower level courts, it's in both EPA policy and in law that Congress passed when they updated the Clean Air Act, but he is trying to undo that. And if the endangerment finding goes, so do all the other programs, whether it's to get light-duty vehicles on the road or heavy-duty vehicles on the road or require more solar, or any of the things that are built on the assumption that climate pollution is hazardous to our health and the environment. So a lot at stake if, in fact, that goes back. Lucky for you, I'm going to a couple of bright spots, and there are at least a couple of bright spots, and I think it's really important to know them and think about them. So solar and wind are absolutely booming. You see it anywhere you go, and you know it from the numbers. So just to give you like a couple of things to think about here, that we have put up more solar, 30 gigawatts of utility scale solar in 2024 alone, and 2025 is projected to be even bigger when it comes to utility scale solar. In most states, rooftop solar is also booming. There are a couple of states like California where that's not the case anymore because of state policy that advocates there are trying to change. But in general, solar is the fastest and cheapest form of energy that people are now developing, and we know it is good for the environment. It's also wildly popular with the public, so it's got a lot of benefits. Batteries are also booming, right? Hopefully not blowing up, booming, but the battery industry is also booming right now. One example, electric vehicle battery prices are expected to fall by another 50% over the next 2 years. And this is the combination of more and more of them getting produced, more and more demand, better technologies and cheaper materials and know-how. So it is one example. There are a lot of examples where our economy doesn't work. This is an example where supply and demand really does work. And as the market gets better and better at producing electric vehicle batteries, they get cheaper and cheaper to produce, which makes it easier and easier for more people to afford to buy electric vehicles. Over the past 5 years, renewable generation has also increased all across the world. In the global south, for example, it's increased by 23% over the last 5 years and is projected to increase at least that much again. So this is a place where there's a lot going on. A lot of clean energy is now hardwired into our economy. It's hardwired into our grid, and the same is true around the world. There are policies that can slow that down, but there's probably nothing that can actually stop it. So a real bright spot on solar and wind. Other kinds of clean energy investments are working as well, and not only working to clean up our energy supply and reduce carbon pollution, but also working to put people to work. So you probably know over the last 3 years, the Biden administration and the Congress passed a number of laws that were designed to help put investments into all sorts of manufacturing across the US. The Inflation Reduction Act was one piece, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the CHIPS Act, all helped to bring investment to this country. Current estimates are that there were about almost $3 trillion invested from the federal government, and $1 trillion were spurred in private investment because of that public investment happening. So that is a lot of growth, it's a lot of development, and it put a lot of people to work. The best estimate was that there were about 400,000 clean energy jobs that were created because of those investments, building more EV factories, building more battery factories, putting up more solar, installing more wind, and other forms of clean energy. So my contention is, and this is a little bit of positive spin for myself, the clean energy revolution is here to stay. It can get slowed, but it can't get stopped. And people are going to keep working to make that all happen. So it should be a bright spot in our economy and for not only investment in the US, for on-sourcing jobs in the US and manufacturing, but also for quality of life for many, many people. Truth be told, about 50,000 of those clean energy jobs have been lost since Trump came into office, and that's a combination of illegally impounding funds that were supposed to go to a lot of investment programs, people not investing because they're afraid of what's happening next, afraid of the tariffs, afraid of what else is going to happen in manufacturing. So we saw a huge upsurge, and now we're seeing a little bit of a downward spiral as well, but still net positive clean energy, net positive clean energy jobs, net positive clean energy manufacturing, net positive clean energy boon for the economy. Another real bright spot is everything doesn't happen at the federal level here in the US, thankfully. Cities and states are making a huge difference. There are 38 states around the country right now with renewable electricity standards, renewable portfolio standards. There are 15 states that have commitments to get to 100% clean or 100% renewable energy. 26 states have efficiency resource standards, helping to make buildings and appliances more efficient. All of this is really, really good progress. And cities are doing great work as well. The ideal city policies, as many of you probably know, are some combination of making buildings really efficient, putting up solar wherever possible, making transportation policies really efficient, pro-electric, pro-public transit, pro-biking and walking, and then also making community centers so people don't have to go as far for anything they need to do, so you just cut down on that kind of pollution. And there are many cities around the US that are doing incredibly groundbreaking work. And the US isn't alone here. There are now countries around the world that are mostly getting their energy from renewable energy. There are cities in every sector of the world that are leading on some aspect or another of transportation or building efficiency or renewables or something else. And I don't see any reason that that progress would stop. So that is another bright spot. So where does this leave us? What it tells me is that we live in a world of contradictions. We know we all care about clean air and clean water and future generations. None of us wants to be sick. We don't want our families to be sick. Yet somehow our political system is not reflecting those core values that we all believe in. And in fact, a lot of the good work that happened over the last 4 years is slowly being reversed, or attempts are being made to reverse it. So what do you do if you care? I'll leave it there. If you care, what do you do in this day and age? And I'm going to walk you through a bunch of ideas for what you can be doing, what I can be doing, what we can be doing. Every one of them has pros and cons. Not any of them is for all of us. But my point here is there is so much we each can be doing. And I'm going to say now, and I'll say it again later, and I'll say it again later. The one thing we can't do is fall into despair. I mean, you can, but that would be really unfortunate. It is exactly what the chaos is designed to do, and it's exactly the direction we don't need to go in. So let me walk you through some of my ideas on what we all can be doing, each of us can be doing, some of us can be doing. And we can start having some discussion here. Like, there's pros and cons of all of them, and I'm sure you're seeing some of that, so let's kind of flesh that out as we go. So there is, if you're like an inventor mind, an entrepreneur mind, a chemist, a scientist, an engineer, you should be developing cool new things. I mean, just 10 years ago, we couldn't use electric vehicles the way we can now. Just 10 years ago, we couldn't do a lot of what we can do now with solar. We make so many leaps forward if people think of creative ideas and create the technology to make these things true. This happens to be a picture of somebody working with seaweed. I have no idea what they're going to do with that seaweed. Maybe it's for sushi for all I know, but I have a feeling it's supposed to be going into some kind of clean energy technology. There are a lot of ways clean energy technology is not so hot. There's a lot of, counter argument to it. Does anyone want to take a minute and think a little bit about this together, or like what the pros and cons of clean energy technology are? Anybody have thoughts on this? I'm starting with the pros, but I'm sure you know some cons. Nobody? Yeah, go ahead, please. Thank you. Yeah, it can be super expensive. Now, over time, those prices can go down and it still can be worth it, but it can be super expensive. True, which is especially bad if some hot new technology idea that's totally unproven and wildly expensive is taking money away from proven technologies that people need. And the most frequent way that that happens is the proven technologies get taken away from poor people or people in some other part of the world, and somebody in Silicon Valley goes forward with some unproven expensive technology. So theoretically, we can protect against that. But I think there are a lot of clean tech ideas. We don't even know what they are yet, and we probably are going to need them or need to try them and experiment with them and see where we end up. So inventing new technology is one thing. I am not going to be doing this, but I hope somebody here figures out some cool new technology to try and solve the climate crisis. Another thing you can do is make the market work. I mean, this is a market economy. This is, capitalism in play. There are a lot of downsides to capitalism in play. It's created a lot of the problems that we are facing today. But there are also some advantages here if you can figure out how to work the market to help solve the climate crisis. So there are people who do shareholder resolutions to hold companies accountable. There are people who direct investments into companies that are pushing clean technologies or clean energy and away from companies that are pushing dirty technology or dirty energies. There's probably other ways or other things you all are familiar with that are ways to move the market towards climate. Boycotts. Doesn't work too well in this day and age, but it's a chance to try and influence the system. Alex, you must have an idea. I'll save you for another idea when I get really desperate. Okay, another way that you can help. This is up some people's alley, not others. Education is really important. It probably isn't an end in and of itself. Just knowing is not solving, but no solving happens without knowing. And whether it's teaching kids about science or teaching people how to eat lower on the food chain or teaching people about the impacts of climate change or teaching people about the benefits of clean energy, all these things are really important. They happen as part of other strategies, but they are important strategies in and of themselves. And this is where some of us can make the biggest difference. Some people just want to do, and get your hands dirty. So this woman is, well, it looks like she's writing about the climate smart agriculture that she is implementing. So it's just one example, but there are all sorts of ways now that farmers have learned to make not only their farms less polluting, because as you know, farms are a huge source of emissions, especially methane, but also farms can be huge carbon sinks and really cut down on climate pollution. That's just one example. You can go and retrofit a home. You can go and help people recover from a storm that was caused by extreme weather. There are tons of ways that you can help with your own two hands and your own brain to go from a carbon-driven economy to a clean energy economy, from a place where people are afraid of climate impacts to a place where each of us is helping to solve the climate crisis. And there are lots of ways that you can do that. Of course, there's advocating for political change, which is the one I know the best. And there are tons of ways to do this. You can be a lawyer, you can be a lobbyist, you can be a researcher, you can be a scientist, you can be an organizer, you can be a campaigner, you can be a communications person. this is at fundamental the way to change the political system to reflect our values, to make sure that if a majority of people in this country want to see more clean energy, we get more clean energy on the grid. We have a total failure in our political advocacy ecosystem right now, and we need to get that fixed. It will take all of us and many more of us to make this happen. There are still ways, though, to work the system to our advantage. A lot of that happens at the city level. A lot of that happens in state government. But even in the federal government right now, there are ways to minimize the impacts of what the Trump administration is doing and make sure we get funding to the right places. There are ways to make sure that Republicans from districts that have a lot of investment in clean energy support those kind of tax credits to keep their own communities full of jobs and manufacturing. So there are opportunities. They're very few and far between right now at the federal level, but there are a lot of other levels of government. And organizing people to think about the implications of their votes, organizing candidates, training candidates. You could be a candidate and hopefully win and make a huge difference through the political process. And then a really cool way to think about social change, it is very long term, but culture, culture, culture. I gave you old examples and new examples here, but there are, see, this is what Google can do for you. There are 10 top climate songs. You'll have to listen. I would sing for you, but I think that would go too far. That, you know, the experts said you should listen to. There are books about climate. There are movies about climate. I have a friend who's running a climate museum. I have another friend who works in Hollywood to try and get them to add climate storylines or acknowledge climate in TV shows on Netflix. So there are a lot of ways to change the culture, and ultimately culture change is as important as political change, which is as important as technology, which is as important as education, which is as important as making sure our financial systems work. We need all of these things to happen if we're gonna not only get out of the mess we're in now, but move ourselves to the kind of clean energy economy, open and fair and accountable government, and the quality of life and health that we want for ourselves and our families. So I guess as I kind of wrap up with what I wanted to share, I think the number one thing that I can say to all of you is you got to stay in the game in some way or other. And it is, it can be overwhelming to read the news, so I wouldn't suggest that you like go down that rabbit hole every single day. It can be overwhelming to think about how little we are and how big those fossil fuel companies are. So I wouldn't spend a lot of time just muddling over that. I would spend time finding other people who are like-minded. I would spend time figuring out, are you best at technology? Or are you best at culture? Or are you best at organizing people? Or are you best at you know, running for office? Like, where is your spot in all of this? And whether it's as a full-time job or a part-time job or a volunteer or, you know, with your disposable income, which I'm sure as students you have a ton of, you know, there's all sorts of ways to make a difference. And I think that although some people are more motivated by fear and some people are more motivated by anger, anybody who is in this room also probably has a good dose of hope in you, or you would not be here. You would not work on the environment if you did not have some hope. And what I would suggest to you is find it and lean into it. I couldn't be more angry. I'm not that fearful. I don't know why, but I am wildly angry and a little bit hopeful. But I know if I lose that hope, my anger is for naught. And I think that, you know, you got to find your own place in this, but there is so much that each of us can do, and there's so much that's needed from us. And I'll also say, just on a personal note, it's like super hard, but it's so rewarding and fun as well to be able to be at least trying to make the kind of difference that you think the world needs to see. So that's my pitch for you to like stay in the game, bring your conscience to whatever you do. It doesn't matter if you lose. We're all going to lose sometime. What we're trying to stave off is everyone losing everything. And so every little bit here helps. And, you know, find your place in the movement, but be in the movement if at all possible. Okay, that's what I want to say to you. So then what do you want to say to me? Oh, okay.
Do you have any questions?
Or tell me what you're thinking about is interesting as well. Like how are you all looking at what's going on right now and what it means for you? I knew you'd come to the rescue.
Hi, Margie.
Alex.
I have a question that is in many ways very related to your talk, but maybe not answering your specific questions,
Right.
but asking you a question. So there are some pundits, some journalists who, in the post-Trump apportioning of blame, of which there's a lot, obviously, like lay concerns at the foot of activism in the Democratic side of like pushing politicians, the party, too far towards like out there positions on things like the climate, but other things as well, obviously, that maybe they would argue didn't work out well politically. And I'm wondering what you think about that and what the role of activism in a political space where not everyone agrees with us, but they should agree with us, but they don't.
Yet.
Should
They
be.
don't yet.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, fine. I think that analysis is total crap. I don't see any merit to it. I think that if politicians, I don't really like the outcome of the election. I don't think that it's going to help us on climate for sure. But I also don't think the election was at all about climate. I don't really think it was about progressivism in any way, shape, or form. I actually think what's happening is the people who care about these issues don't care enough to show up or to change the storyline. That's why I think the culture piece is almost as important as some of the other pieces, or more important for some people, because everyone in this room, I don't know everyone, I'll say you care about climate and clean energy, but not everyone gets out to vote because you don't see it as important, whereas the people who think something else is at stake show up. And so I think it is actually, to me, the lesson is we need to organize more, not organize less, and left is fine with me too. But we have to organize more, and we have to be able to talk to people about their real lives and real experience to help move climate and clean energy up the list of priorities and make it worth their while to go vote and see that as connected. Because I think if it's just abstract, you might stay home because you know climate change is happening and it's sort of over there and it's not like in your face, and you know you can get a solar panel, and most people aren't thinking about it. But if people actually realize how much climate change has to do with their health of their children, just what it means for increased in asthma in young kids and missed school days, you would never let this happen. We haven't done a good enough job of making sure people realize it. So it's a little bit, you know, you go and see a surgeon and they say you need surgery, and you came and asked an organizer and I say we need more organizing. But we need more organizing. And we need people to really understand these problems personally and hear it from different people, and it needs to be in the culture. And I think people's values are perfectly good. I think that they don't always vote on their values or bother voting at all. And I think that's where we can make the biggest difference. Do you disagree?
No, not necessarily. I think that it is, I think the point about what answer should one expect from the head of a like significant activist org. Yeah, that's what I expect. But no, I don't disagree.
So stereotyped, but accurate.
Yeah.
Alex and I were in a class together, so we're used to having this little. Okay, somebody else must have something to say here. Ask or what you're thinking. Yeah, please.
Hey, thank you for your talk. Firstly, I'm doing a presentation next week actually about like hope and the environment.
Okay, good.
And apologies if you would be repeating yourself with this question, with the answer to this question, but I'm trying to balance kind of realism with what's going on in the world to make sure that we're not in like denial in our hope, but also trying to stay like inspiring and encouraging and not like introducing more anxiety into others' minds. I'm curious, like your strategy for balancing that realism and inspiration.
Yeah, so I have my like what works for me personally, which I don't suggest that you do for most people. It's not going to work for most people. I'm a little whacked that way, but like I went to a couple of conferences in the last month, and at one of them, the whole thing was hope. You know, yes, there's problems, but this is all about hope, and it's hope that's gonna, and it's hope is a practice. It doesn't just come to you, and you have to work on it, and every day you should work to be hopeful. And then I went to another conference where the speaker said, I'm sick of the hope bullshit. What's your fucking strategy for winning? And so you see the total juxtaposition. This is like 2 weeks apart, you know, and they're all esteemed people on these topics, you know, and it sort of goes back to Alex's question too. It's like, what will it take for the science to match up with what people think about to what they do to what political outcomes we get? And I think where I end up is that people are more anxious about the unknown than they are about the known. So from where I sit, we have to be able to tell people, talk to people, have them understand there are big, really bad problems. You know, $400 billion in costs is a pretty bad problem. Thousands of deaths is a pretty bad problem. Temperature increase over 1.5 degrees Celsius is hard to explain to people, but we all know it's a pretty bad problem, and people have to understand that. And the more you can understand that, then you get angry enough or inspired enough to do something. And I think pretending like if we don't tell them the world's all screwed up, they're not going to know about it. I think that's false. I think people are smarter than that. And I think there's more anxiety about the unknown than the known. So I would call out, name, I mean, not every single problem in the world, but I would name that first. And then I was so taken with this whole thing in these two conferences that we just did this in our staff meeting, all staff meeting last week. And it's like, you know, you more hope, you more anger, you more fear, like what is motivating you? And I think probably on our campaign, and it is an advocacy campaign, so, you know, sort of a little bit different DNA than the average person, we were about 60% anger and about 40% hope. But the angry people all said, I have just enough hope that I try. And the hopeful people, only half of them said they had anger. And that was, it's kind of, I don't know what to do with all this, but I guess what I would say to you is, I don't think you can shy away from the real problems. And I don't think anybody really wants you to. That's even scarier. If they're so bad, you can't even tell me about them. It's like if the doctor is like, I've never seen this before. You know, nobody wants that. So call it right out. Then I do think seeing examples of change are really important for people to know it's possible. But I think we have to let people, you know, be themselves. If you're more angry, stoke that fire. If you're more hopeful, stoke that fire. I think even the angry people have enough hope that they show up every day. And I think that's what you're trying to encourage. There's a little hope all over, and then some places there's a lot of anger too. That sounds really cool though. Tell me how it goes. All right, what else? Yeah, please. Oh, all right, you go. Okay.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was nice to have the framing of like things that are wrong and then also steps that we can take to make things better. And kind of in that vein, I'm curious, related to the push towards kind of like not talking about climate change, like the freedom to use that word kind of being increasingly constrained. And coupled with attacks on like climate education and education more broadly, I'm curious, do we go forward as environmental professionals with kind of more subversive strategies where we're talking about these ideas without saying the words explicitly, and kind of have those subversive means as our primary ways of making change? Or do we double down and kind of continue using these strategies and these words and pushing towards all these ideas, DEI, like climate change education, global warming? Do we double down and kind of adopt and kind of continue with these ideas that are becoming so politically volatile and polarizing? I think that's something that I'm struggling with a bit, is like, I think saying the word gives it a lot of power and impact, and it's important for us to be kind of in dialogue with these ideas, and like talking around something is way different than talking about something. But at the same time, I don't want that to erode my capacity to drive change and my ability to connect with people across, different political and social lines. So yeah, just really curious about your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Love this question. Tulsi Gabbard, does everyone know who she is? Well, you can rest assured she just took climate change off the list of major international threats to the US. That is what happens if you don't say the words. You do nothing about them. So I'm going to say my answer to you is yes and. Yes, we have to talk about these things. We're underdogs. Underdogs do not prevail if they don't fight for themselves. And it is a fight. And every day doesn't need to be, a battle, but you have to understand and you have to be cognizant of, and you have to be thinking about, fossil fuel interests aren't just going to go away. And the people who then they help fund in elections, who then become President of the United States, potentially, they're not just going to go away. So that's a fight you have to, and you can't organize people if you don't tell them what you're organizing them around. So I think that point that you made is absolutely true. This is a fight. We have to call it out. It's like say her name. It's like, it's every movement that is about an underdog, we have been fighting to be seen, and we have to keep fighting to be, everything, race, females, gender, differently gendered people. It's all like, see us and hear us and know we are climate campaigners. We believe we should live in a stable, healthy planet. That said, you don't have to make your speech to every single audience. You can pick and choose where you're going to emphasize what, and I think that's really important as well. So, people with kids are more interested in childhood asthma than they are something else, or people who work in clean energy are more interested in the role they can play than something else, or people who, that's just a trigger. You don't have to start there. You can start with how expensive extreme weather is and move someplace else. So I'm not saying our job is to bludgeon everybody over the head, but our job is not to erase ourselves or a major planetary problem that is staring us down. Other people might disagree, but that's my take on that. Do not erase us.
And then I think there was one more. Did you still have a question? No? Okay. I think with that, we'll wrap it up.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see you. Thank you for coming.
There are still spots for tonight's dinner. So if you're interested in joining dinner with Margie, please reach out to me. My name is Isabella Valencia. Thank you.